Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in a minute or so, just letting people in. While you're waiting, if you would be so kind as to put your name in the chat and where you are logging in from, so that we can get a sense of who's in the room. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Some folks are still logging in, but I'm just going to get started because we have some introductions to do. And I just want to welcome everyone. My name is Andrea Nandoskar. I'm the Education Program Manager at Historic Hawai Foundation. And I want to thank you for joining us today for the 38th Annual Experts Historic Preservation Lecture Series. This series is curated and co-sponsored by the UH School of Architecture's Historic Preservation Graduate Certificate Program and Historic Hawai Foundation. And this year's theme is conserving architecture. And today's presenter will speak to preservation efforts and outcomes for two unique sites, Queen Emma Summer Palace in Honolulu and Shikoku 88 Temples Pilgrimage Monument, Holualoa, Hawaii Island. Just a note, we are recording all the lectures. Last week's lecture is available on HHF's YouTube channel and the event webpage, and we'll have this one up within a few days, if not sooner. If you have questions along the way, we will have time for questions today. You can put them in the chat and we'll respond, our speaker will respond to them at the end of today's presentation. And if you could take a moment to complete a brief survey at the end of today's presentation, we'd appreciate that. It helps us with programming and improving what we offer. For those new to Historic Hawai Foundation, we are a statewide nonprofit dedicated to helping people save historic places. These are sites that tell the stories of the multi-layered history of Hawaii. We do this through education, advocacy, assistance, and protection of and for historic places. I'd now like to welcome our series partner, Dr. William Chapman, Dean of the School of Architecture, University of Hawaii at Manoa, who will introduce today's presenter. Thank you very much.
Aloha, Kako. It's really nice to be back in this place. I think last time we called out Ralph Cam, who did a very good job with the program for something like 6 years, and we all miss him very much. And I'm sure some of you were here at the last lecture where we spoke a little more about him. But again, we kind of dedicate this year's presentations to Ralph. So before that, I used to do this, and I did it for something like 25 years before becoming Dean of Architecture. And we've now moved the Historic Preservation Program over to architecture. And so I wear two hats, so to speak. And so I'm the director of the preservation program as well. And I thought it would have a program like this that really addressed the core issue of historic preservation as a practice rooted in architecture and architectural conservation would be a good idea. So again, I have a number of good speakers this year, 6 in all, and we're hoping you can come to future talks as well. So it's a great pleasure to introduce a friend of some 32 years and a person who I respect very much in the field of architectural conservation. His name in many ways is synonymous with architectural conservation in Hawaii. So Glenn Mason is the founder of Mason Architects, and he's notably a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. He's widely recognized for his role in the preservation of so many historic places that we would use up the whole period to describe them all, but immediately we could talk about Iolani Palace, Huala'i Palace, Queen Emma's Summer Palace he's going to talk to you about, the Lunalilo tomb. There's a plethora of different things that he and his firm have done over 40 years of work in Hawaii. He's also worked well outside of Hawaii. He's done projects in Guam and in other countries as well. So again, this all adds to the fact that he is really noted and respected for his work. Historic Hawaii Foundation's recognized this with over 60 awards to Glenn over the years, including in 2014, he was awarded the annual Frank Haynes Award for Lifetime Achievement in Conservation and Historic Preservation. So, Glenn, thank you so much for giving up your time to share your experience with us, and look forward to some of you hold on to some questions for the end, and look forward to seeing Glenn's presentation now. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, great. We're really going to talk about two projects here. They're quite different. And the first one that we're going to talk about is the Shikoku 88 Temples Pilgrimage Monument. Now, let's go to the next slide. The main reason that we're really talking about this project is because it's fairly small. I mean, this is not a building. It is, a simple monument that is along Mamalahoa Highway. And this would not have happened, in my mind, if it were not for the individuals at Pulamaia Kona Heritage Preservation Council. And the important thing about this project, and the important point to make about this project, is that it was a community group that made it happen. It is not a big project, which I think illustrates the importance of preservation, large and small. I mean, I've been involved in Iolani Palace for many years. This is not a palace. It's a very small thing, and yet it's very important to the community. And I have to sort of issue kudos to Antu, who pulled me into this project. I personally think this probably wouldn't have happened without her. So at any rate, we'll go through and describe this. It is a simple project. This was built in 1925. The funding for this came actually from Historic Hawaii and the County of Hawaii. I have no idea what anything costs, so don't ask me. And that's not the important thing about this. The saving and restoration of this monument is or has become a source of conversation for the community. And that's what's important about it. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. So this is the condition of the monument when we first got engaged with it. Okay, and there's a couple of things that are kind of important. First, there was spalling of concrete at one corner, and you can see this, the rusted, actually it was a rusted pipe, and we all wondered what it was for. And to this day, I'm still not sure what it was for, because it didn't do anything. I think it acted as reinforcing, but it was just buried very shallowly in the cement of the pillar. Now, the important thing about the pillar is actually the incised characters that were on all four sides of the pillar. And I'm not exactly sure how they were done. It's just that the pillar was coated with a very thin mortar or plaster, I should say. And so those symbols are literally, that calligraphy is literally cut into the cement that is the base of the pillar. And the one thing that we knew that we absolutely could not do is do anything that would affect those that calligraphy. We had to retain that. And yet we had to fix the pillar. So go to the next slide. So this is, again, a photo that's of the monument, and it shows really how the thing was built. The base was really just stone that was covered with plaster. The entire monument was built on a stone outcropping. The only concrete was the pillar itself. And we have a couple of shots here that show this steel element that was in the corner, which when it was taken out, it really didn't make any difference at all to the way the thing was built. But it was so bad that you can see in one of the photos, the moss growing on top of the stone. It had really cracked up. So let's go to the next slide. So a little bit of background on this. There were two plasterers. The original goal here was, let's do it with people from Hawaii Island, okay? And we interviewed two plasterers, and for various reasons, we ended up working with a construction company from Hawaii to do the work. Now, I had worked with TM Construction previously on the Wiley tomb at the Royal Mausoleum. And so they knew what they were doing, which is the key. So they were actually less expensive than quotes that we got from the Big Island. And it's partially because they got it. They knew what they were doing. They'd been there before. And so they were able to do this fairly efficiently. Next slide. Okay. Actually, I have to admit that this is a group photo. These are all of the individuals who were involved in really from the community side. And Antu is in the back there, and wearing the hat, I think. And the reverend from the temple is in the group on the left. They, in my experience, and Antu, I think, might be able to comment on this. I think that Antu's group was the one that spearheaded this effort. And the restoration of it, again, wouldn't have happened without the community group. It was not led by the temple or the mission. It was led by the community group. So let's go to the next slide. Now, a couple of things that happened subsequent to actually restoring the monument, and this is a picture of it, on the road. They installed an interpretive marker, which they were all grouped around in the previous photo. And they also installed some rocks and other things to keep vehicles from being able to get to and possibly damage the monument. So there was subsequent work that the community group did on its own to help preserve this monument. Now, the mission itself, you actually I don't think you even see it from the road. This marks the entrance to the mission, but it is not part of the mission. It's further back in. Anyway, I just wanted, this is a small project. And I think that the important lesson here is that preservation comes in all sizes and shapes, okay? So let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is a separate, another project type. And I wanted, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Queen Emma Summer Palace, but go to the next slide. Okay, so if you haven't been there, you should go. It's on the Poly Highway, and I put the address in. It functions as a house museum. It was originally built in 1848, and it's one of the very few examples in Hawaii of a Greek revival style. It was built for a guy named H.A. Pierce, but actually he only owned it for, I don't know, maybe less than 10 years. And it was then taken over by John Young, one of John Young's sons, who then when he passed away, that the property was bequeathed to or came to the woman that became known as Queen Emma. So Queen Emma actually owned this property from 1857 until she died in 1885. And once she passed away, it was kind of in the netherworld. It got fairly deteriorated. And then finally, the Daughters of Hawai took over the responsibility for this building in 1915. And they made some repairs and whatnot and opened it as a museum in 1917. So it's been functioning as a museum now for well over 100 years. Subsequent to their taking over, there were various changes that were added on the backside, a caretaker's house, toilet room, offices, and Emalani Hale, which is a separate structure, was built on the grounds I think in the early 1950s. So next slide. Okay, now, where did the money come from for this work? There were actually two $300,000 grants and aid from the state that funded this work. Now, the $300,000 one year, $300,000 the next year, and then state parks, which owns the property, or which is responsible for the property actually, decided to combine the two so that it became a single project that was $600,000 in limit. Now, originally, the core of the project really was the restoration of the Edinburgh Room, and we'll go into that a little bit more. And there was a lot of concern about the stability of the wall that faces Pali Highway, which was one of the reasons why the amount was what it was. Now, two bids were received by the Daughters of Hawai, and the lowest bid was from a very good contractor, Constructors Hawaii, and it was substantially under the GIA amount. And that is a blessing that we rarely have, but what it did was it allowed us to basically expand the scope of work. And let me show you, let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to show you a couple of other things. So the original scope was to restore the Edinburgh Room, to strengthen the Eva wall, to move a handrail and stairs, and I have a couple photos on that, and to repair the Mauka facing windows. Those windows are the ones that open into the Edinburgh Room and get the brunt of the weather because they face Mauka. And so they had a lot of water damage, and we were able to do some exploration based on repairing one of those windows prior to doing this project. So next slide. So the first thing we did was we cut a hole on the inside of one of the rooms, interior of that wall that we were concerned about. And the main reason for that was to check out, well, how well is the siding connected to these verticals? And it was fine. That basically opened up the that basically gave us $30,000 to $40,000 more money to work with to do all sorts of other work. And so I'm going to take you through all the work that was done as a result of having this GIA. So next slide. Okay, this is the Edinburgh room before any work was done on it. Well, in this current job. Now, one of the things that had happened is that the interior wall surfaces were all covered with actually 1x12 boards. And over that, there had been installed a 1/4-inch hardboard. And the net result of that, and you can see it in the detail on the image on the right, is that the wall surface was actually about the same as the casing around the windows. It looked funny. It was funny. That is not the way historic buildings are built. And so that was the thing that started us thinking about, hey, maybe we ought to really restore this building. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. So what was decided was that, well, naturally, we assumed that the building had wallpaper on it. That the room, excuse me, had wallpaper on it, because that's how many buildings were done in that time period. And we were correct. Now, I have to tell you, we had to order the wallpaper pattern, which was an 1860s period wallpaper, before we knew whether there was any wallpaper under all this. And fortunately, there was not. And it actually gave us license to use a period wallpaper. Now, a couple of things to point out. The photo in the lower left actually is of a detail of what used to be an exterior wall of the original house. Okay. And what you can see, those little nails there, are where they had attached the muslin that the wallpaper was attached to, was glued to. And the photo above it actually shows all those 1x12 boards covering that siding that was on the original house. So just one strip was taken off, and that's the illustration. Now, when all of this stuff was taken off, we found a lot of termite damage. But structurally, the building was still quite sound. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, actually the photo on the left was taken when we were repairing one of the windows, and it kind of shows the extent of the termite damage that existed at the time. And the way the original building was built was the studs of the walls, the vertical structural elements of the walls were covered with, it looked like 3/8 to 1/2-inch thick boards that created a solid wall, but they were all termite eaten. Okay. I mean, and you can see the damage there. And the amount of repair that was needed under the windows due to leakage and other things is kind of illustrated in the photo on the right. Many vertical elements had to be replaced. There was a lot of repair that was needed. So let's go to the next slide. Now, this is just a slide showing the work in progress in the Edinburgh room, and it shows the wallpaper installed, and now the casings around the windows are the way they should be. The casings around the doors are the way they should be in relationship to the wall. This wallpaper was installed by a San Francisco company. The art of installing muslin mounted wallpaper that art is gone from here. And so we actually worked with this company before on the Queen's bedroom at Washington Place. We brought them back to do this work. And so they're all kind of looking at the work that they had accomplished in this photo. And remember that photo of the close-up of the siding that had a couple of nails in it? The photo on the lower right is in that same location. It shows what happens. I mean, all that siding is still there. First time it had been exposed probably for 100 years. But the nature of muslin mounted wallpaper is that it covers over, it basically rides over holes, uneven surfaces, and it looks perfectly flat, but it's only the thickness of the wallpaper and the muslin that is bridging all of those gaps. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, well, this is one of the photos of the Edinburgh room when we were done. After the Daughters of Hawai, he had put a lot of their materials back in the room, and it just kind of illustrates that. I think the next slide does too. Let's look at that. Okay, now there's a couple of things to point out from this that are on this slide. The cloak case was originally installed. This cloak is very valuable, and the case was built to be as transparent as possible, but to try to keep bugs out and to modify climatic fluctuations. It was originally installed, as you see it in the upper right corner, in a door opening between the Edinburgh room and what was once a bedroom. The Daughters of Hawai decided they wanted to interpret the room as a bedroom. And so two things happen. One is that case, with slight modifications, was taken out of that opening and moved to where you see it in the main photo. In doing that, we basically had to create we had to install doors because there never were doors there, or at least not in anybody's memory. And the doors that you see in the lower right, it's a little bit of a close-up. That door is, or those doors are a duplicate of other exterior doors in the building. So it's basically recreating what was there before the Edinburgh room was built. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. This is really to kind of illustrate that the shutters were, in really bad shape. All of the shutters on this side of the building, on the Mauka side of the building, were replaced. And frankly, they had been replaced previously, and lasted less than 5 years because they didn't use the right wood. And so that was always part of the job, to replace the shutters. And actually, by the time the work started, the shutters on the right side in the picture on the left were gone. They had fallen apart and just disintegrated. So now here's where, well, let's go to the next slide. Okay, another part of the original project was moving these stairs. Now, the photo on the left shows the problem. They used to park in an area, and anybody who backed up would whack the lower railing, knock it off, and they'd have to fix it. And so the solution was to move the steps further in. And now this is an illustration of assumptions that don't necessarily pan out. I assumed that the landing between the two sets of stairs had coral blocks in it. And so we, on our drawings, required that there be a test hole to verify whether that was the case. And the photo that has the root in it at the bottom and somebody's finger pointing to was a result of doing that test hole. And it was proven that the landing did not have coral blocks in it. So then the workers started to ship out everything. And fortunately, Holly McEldowney from State Parks was up there when they had just started chipping away at the steps. And it turned out that those steps were coral blocks. And so with some consultation with the daughters, it was decided to reinstall the coral blocks and express them. Okay. The photo on the right shows the coral blocks just kind of set aside for reinstallation later. The photo at in the lower center shows the coral blocks installed. And in fact, if you look at other parts of the other stairs to the doors / shutters around the building, they're all coral steps. Now, I actually believe that the steps in the background are also likely coral, but they've all been covered with cement to be nice and clean and safe. Let's go to the next slide. So this is what it looks like today. This is a photo only taken maybe a month ago, and it shows the coral steps and what was done in moving everything over. And the photo at the right actually was kind of, I thought it was kind of cool just because there's moss growing out of the places of where the coral is a little bit recessed. And I just think that this is part of telling the story of Queen Emma Summer Palace. And I'm really delighted with the fact that the daughters decided to go this way. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, there were several other things that were involved in this project. One of them was there was concern about a lintel over the main entry. We opened up the fascia of it and saw and analyzed the structure and made some repairs to it. The gutters, this is I guess a little known fact, but this is a building with cedar shingles, and cedar has tannic acid in it. And when it rains, all the tannic acid gets sucked up by the moisture and put into copper gutters, and copper does not like tannic acid. And so we essentially, as part of this work, lined all the gutters so that we would not have holes like that appearing in the gutters. So let's go to the next slide. Another thing that was part of the basic work, but it actually got expanded, was in an earlier project we had discovered that the doors on the inside had been repaired and painted, but they were repaired. If there was termite damage, they just used spackling and filled in the holes. And as part of our work, we required that the doors be stripped and then have Dutchmen put in to basically replace missing wood with wood. And then they were repainted. Now, in doing that work, we also found that in some cases, in one particular case, I should say, the door jambs were completely termite eaten. And so the photo in the middle is a photo that is actually looking into the wall. The jamb of that door was so deteriorated, it had to be completely removed. And you literally could see between the two faces of the wall in doing that. All of that had to be repaired. But again, we had the funds. And so we had the privilege of being able to really be able to do this work and do it right. So I think we have one more slide here. Yeah, okay. So this is basically how the doors are installed. I mean, all of them are folded because they want free flow. The doors are all folded back against the walls. And this opening that you're looking at here is exactly the same one where all that termite damage was shown. Okay. And so it just shows that the level of restoration that was done with the opening and the doors to restore it to its original condition. So let's see, I think that's the last slide, but let me, is that Michelle? I think that's the last slide.
That's the last one.
Okay. So, yeah, all right. So I think the Edinburgh, the whole project at Queen Emma Summer Palace was one that, you know, I mean, it was a fairly significant project, but we replaced shutters that weren't originally part of the scope of work. We dealt with repairing termite damage that was not evident until we actually opened up walls. And so we were able to tolerate some changes in the scope that cost money because we had the funding to do so. One of the things that grew out of this is because there was funding for it, there was a maintenance plan created using those funds for the use of the daughters. And so I think, you know, we rarely ever have this opportunity to do things, but we basically repaired everything that needed to be repaired at Queen Emma Summer Palace because the contractor was very reasonable in their bid. So anyway, I think that's it. We'll open up to any questions that people might have.
Andrea, I think we can handle questions from the audience, but maybe I
Okay.
could run through a couple things that have shown up in the
Okay.
chat, and maybe, but Andrea's been very conscientious in answering them along the way. But I do want to mention that the project was in part funded by a grant through Historic Hawai Foundation. This is the Queen Emma project through the Freeman Foundation. So I think many of you have seen that in the chat, but in case not, and it won a Historic Hawaii Foundation Preservation Award in 1922. I had a quick question. Wasn't there an enormous elaborate sideboard or cabinet in the Edinburgh room before?
Yeah, I think they cleaned a lot of that out. I mean, one of the key characteristics of doing projects like this is that one of the significant costs of doing a project like this is, what do you do with all the stuff inside? I mean, they had all sorts of, you know, portraits and furniture and everything else. All of that had to be moved out when the work was being done. And so the daughters had to hire a moving company, find a place to store this stuff in a secure manner. They had to watch over the moving company to make sure they didn't screw stuff up. So this issue of what do you do with stuff in a room that you are working on is a big question, and it's a cost that needs to be realized, because it's not $100, it's 5,000, 10,000 bucks to be able to do this, and it has to be factored in and thought about. And sometimes, I mean, the daughters are used to this, but there are some owners who aren't, and you kind of need to remind them.
Thanks, Glenn. I think if anyone's looking at the chat, we've got a lot of expertise out there in our audience today. So come on out, Seymour, a former student of mine and still longtime friend, said that the sideboard moved into the original dining room. I knew that it had something to do with an exchange of gifts between. I mean, the Edinburgh room was built for purposes of a visit, right? A royal visit?
It was built in 1863, which is actually the same year that Queen Emma's husband, the king died. But it was never used for the purpose for which it was built, which was a visit by the Duke of Edinburgh. But the date is 1863, and it was built as an entertainment room. Okay. So it was a big space, or a fairly large space, and it still is basically the same kind of space that it was before. I think what was one of the most interesting things about the project was essentially seeing the room, if you will, unclothed. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that was tacked over all these wall surfaces. And I mean, seeing the original side of the summer palace, actually before the Edinburgh Room was built. I mean, I don't know when the last time it was that was ever exposed. It might have been before 1863. And so I think seeing all of this stuff was really fascinating. And we could see former windows that had been closed off for various reasons. I mean, it was all there. The story was in the framing and it was all recorded. So.
Get one other thing I would, one technical term that many people may not be familiar with is Glenn made a reference to a Dutchman. So I'll let Glenn explain what a Dutchman is.
But essentially, because what happened with the doors was that all of the spackling and other infill that was used to fill in and make the doors look smooth once they were painted, all of that spackling was taken out. And so wood was actually shaped to the wherever that damage was and was completely replaced, so that the doors are now all wood doors. And in doing that, you had to literally patch in, that's the Dutchman terminology, of with wood into the existing wood structure of the doors. So I mean, I think, well, first of all, it's stronger to do it that way. But frankly, we felt it was more honest as well. It's just the amount of spackling was pretty surprising, actually.
Well, and I guess too, it preserves the maximum of the original material.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
by not replacing the whole panel, for instance.
Right.
So Baron Ching in the audience has asked who can help out with Hānaiakamalama, and he missed Spencer Lineweber's leadership there, and we all, of course, will miss Spencer in our conservation preservation community. But I think maybe Historic Hawai Foundation, you could reach out to them to see what sorts of initiatives could be taken.
Yeah, well, I know what to do there, and that is keep the plants from growing out of the damn walls. Jesus Christ.
I think
Anyway,
that's the main threat.
That was 30 years ago we made that observation, and anyway, whatever.
If you all keep reading the chat, you'll see a very detailed explanation from Kamana again about this elaborate piece, the sideboard that was sent back from England by Prince Albert, the consort of Queen Victoria, using koa as part of it. So it wasn't ever really part of the original event planned for this. It was a kind of post-event president, I guess. So.
Right. I think the daughters have done a very good job on interpreting things. I mean, a lot of what's there is conjectural, but they have original pieces of furnishings that are really valuable and frankly irreplaceable at this point. So yeah, it's well worth it to just go there and go on the tour. So.
Bill, I sent you a few questions from the audience. Let me know if you're able to. Oh, one of them was regarding the history and significance of the Shikoku Monument, and on to thank you. She put something in the chat for people who are interested to learn more. It's a fascinating site and history.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too bogged down in it, but yes, there's a lot of history there, and I think like Antu really, she's got it better than I ever will. So broken window. Oh yeah, well, okay. Broken window. There was a broken window. Oh, well, it happened in the Mauka facing doors to the Edinburgh Room. There was and actually the same thing happened at Hulahei. where there was a pane of glass that was broken. So there are two ways to go about this. One is, if you can find it, historic glass. And with Hula, we were actually, there was someone who said, well, I have some panes of glass from a building that was about the same age, and why don't we use those? It turned out they weren't quite the right size. So that became a little bit more difficult. But if you can find historic glass from the era, that's probably ideal. We have very often called for restoration glass. Bentheim makes glass the way they used to make it, which is by essentially blowing big cylinders and laying them out flat. Now, the thing that you have to be really careful about is that you have to be careful to ask for what is at least Bentheim calls light restoration glass, because if you just ask for restoration glass, you're going to get stuff that's pretty wild. And I mean, it's thin, it's fairly thin, but it's very distorted. And if you want that look, fine, but that's not the way most historic windows looked. That you could see the characteristics of uneven surfaces and whatnot. You have to be very careful when you're ordering this glass to get the right glass. Now, the old window glass is typically, I mean, it's as thin as, I mean, 1/8 of an inch is thick. I've seen this stuff more like 1/16 of an inch. So it can be very thin, and but again, it comes back to what is the level of unevenness you want to see in the glass. And the point is to match what was there or what exists adjacent to it as much as possible. And, again, if you can get glass from the period, all the better, but that's not often an alternative. So anyway.
We have another question about the monument, and came from Kirsten. And she was wondering, how do you retain the inscriptions while repairing the spalling?
Okay, well, first of all, very fortunately, there was no damage to the inscriptions. The damage, well, there was a lot of damage to the base, okay? And then the damage to the pillar itself was almost entirely confined to where that piece of steel was. So we took out that piece of steel and essentially replastered that, patching that pillar in, but we really did not need to know, we didn't need to get into the inscriptions. That would have been pretty hard to do. I mean, it's what is fascinating to me about the inscriptions is the way they were done. They had to have been carved into the concrete pillar itself. And I'm not sure how we would have done that, but we didn't have to. So.
We're still getting interesting information about the sideboard, and I guess we had, if Prince Alfred visited in 1869 and the sideboard came afterwards, that would have been after the death of King Albert, Prince Albert.
There's an admission here, guys. I mean, I've worked on Iolani Palace mostly for a very, very long time. And when people visit, I say, listen to the docents, because they know the social history and the history of all of this stuff. And I'm a buildings guy. I'm a structures guy.
Yeah.
And
I'm not
you
trying
know,
to put you on. I'm
yeah,
not trying to put you on
no,
the
no, I'm
spot.
just telling,
Just sharing,
I'm just
sharing
admit,
the
I'm being
chat.
fairly honest about this, guys. I mean, you know, you talk to me about sideboards, and I would go to the Daughters of Hawaii and say, hey, tell me about this
I got
sideboard.
to admit, it was my fault for bringing up
Sorry.
my fault for bringing up the sideboard, but
Yeah,
it
right,
definitely has sparked a great deal of discussion.
right. Yeah, no problem. So,
We still have time for a few more questions, everyone.
okay. So what's the question about the choral steps? I just saw the chat from Carol.
Thank God. Oh yeah, can you ask? Someone asked to ask a question about the choral steps. Do we have a question about the choral steps, somebody?
Yeah, ask it again, because I am pretty familiar with that.
Earlier in chat. I'm gonna
Okay.
go look. I get all the chat on my screen, so I've got to try
I'm
to go
looking
back.
to, I'm looking.
So, well, let me explain a little bit more about the choral steps, okay? I mean, we'll call them choral steps for now, because that's how they were installed. When they were pulled up, if you remember the image that was there of the stones, we flipped them all over. And so they were very, they looked really kind of dark and red, okay? Because those faces were face down on the dirt, okay? But the reason that we did that is that those faces were the most intact. And so when we reinstalled the coral blocks, we flipped them all over so that the most intact surface was the surface that people would walk on. Because remember, if it hadn't been for Holly being there at the right time and saying, "Whoa, guys, stop," some of those steps might have just been chipped away. And so there was a little bit of damage to the top side of what those steps were. So that's one of the reasons why we use the bottoms of the coral blocks for the steps. And one of the interesting things that happened was that, you know, they were dark and stained, and then rain took care of all that. It all went away. And we never thought that I never thought that would happen. And the guys who were installing the steps actually added a little bit of stain to the mortar so that it would match the steps better. And then that was wasted because the steps changed color. And they look now like, you know, they look like coral steps. They don't look all, you know, dark and red and all of that. So it's interesting what nature will do and what nature will take care of. It's not uncommon. The use of coral to create steps was not uncommon in those days. We didn't stop building coral stone buildings until maybe the 1860s. 1870, that would be about the latest it was ever done. And so coral, because it's so relatively easily cut and shaped, was a quite frequently used construction material. You know, we didn't have quarries. There were no environmentalists worrying about cutting up reefs. So it was a ready source of material. And if you look at Queen Emma Summer Palace, you can see the use of coral steps, particularly on the Poly Highway side, because every one of those doors, literally the only windows in Queen Emma Summer Palace are those that go into the Edinburgh Room that face Mauka. All of the other openings in the original building were doors. And now of course, they've got shutters and doors, but that was the original construction. And so there were coral steps that went up to every one of those doors/windows, okay? And that's just the way the building was built. So
quite a bit of extra discussion about the steps, and I'll share some of that with you.
Oh, okay.
One was that doesn't the coral deteriorate quickly? And then to handle this, have they now compromised the safety of the walkway up to the house? These are
Okay.
two
Now,
comments.
look, those are good questions. Now, that's, I don't think we should be too worried about the coral deteriorating. I mean, the coral steps that face the Poly Highway, for example, yes, they're a little deteriorated, but they've been there for 100 and, what, 160 something, 170 something years. But there is a concern because the coral steps by their nature are uneven. And so it's, you could argue that it's a little bit more of an uneven surface, therefore an unsafe surface. Two things about that. Number one, the daughters felt that the interpretive value of having the coral steps there was very important to them. Okay. But secondly, these steps lead to the lanai, which is the main entrance to the palace. There are steps on both ends of the lanai that are, well, I think they were coral at one point, but they've been covered with cement. Okay. And so there is a safe way to get up there if you are concerned about that. Now, it's been more than a year, and there have been no reports of anybody tripping or having a problem with those steps. So, but it is something to think about. It was a decision that was made for its interpretive value. And
a further
yeah.
build up on that question was, so those were the only part of the walkway that were coral? Because someone pointed out that there's the kind of landings and then another set of steps. Were those not coral as well?
I think, well, first of all, I think I mentioned that I had suspected that the landing was made of coral block, and I was wrong. Okay. I also believe that the steps leading from the landing to the lanai are cement covered coral blocks. I think that that's the way, it's unnatural for it not to have been that way. And if you look at the steps at either end of the lanai, the top riser is very short. It's like 3 or 4 inches maybe. And that can only be because somebody slathered cement over the top of the coral. And so, yes, I think that there's coral under there. I think that at some point somebody said, well, we want to smooth all these surfaces out so that we don't have any concerns about people stepping on them or and that's always going to be a debate. I believe that the steps that lead up to the chapel at the Royal Mausoleum were also coral. It was built in 1860. And it would be very surprising to me if they were not coral. And looking at the cracks, that's what I believe. But does it make sense to overtly strip it off? We had to move these steps. We had to move them because cars were backing into the railings. Once we move them and discover that they're coral block, how do we possibly rationalize reconstructing the steps and throwing away the coral, the historic coral? There's no rationale for it. And so, yes, it's not something that one should ignore, but I mean, this issue of the uneven surface, but there is a real value in being able to interpret to people, hey, this is the way things used to be.
Right. I think this well illustrates the issue that making decisions about conservation is quite complex, which I think the whole, Glenn's whole talk talked about that. It is
Yeah.
often a matter of compromise or decision-making involved.
Right.
So
Yeah.
nothing is just easy, and you don't, quote, restore things necessarily back to, quote, the way they were, because sometimes there are inherent contradictions in that too. So,
Well, the Daughters of Hawaii have been the caretakers of this site of Queen Emma Summer Palace for over 100 years. And, you know, if we had been told by the Daughters of Hawaii, we want concrete slathered all over it again, we would have put concrete all over them again. They're the people who are responsible. We have to, we can't sit here and go, oh, well, I want this, and therefore it happens. It doesn't work that way. They were the controlling entity here, and we can advise, we can present options, but it's their choice in the end. So
Thank you so much for that, Glenn.
I see that Andrea has opened up her face again here, so I'm guessing that means we're reaching toward the end of our
It's one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bill, would you like to say anything before
Yeah,
I close us
I
out?
definitely want to thank Glenn for sharing his expertise with everyone, and he's obviously provoked a lot of interest in the chat. I haven't seen quite such an active chat strip for a long time, so I'm glad everybody found it as engaging as I did. So
yeah, I want to roll back to one thing though. I wanted to do two projects here because they're very different projects. I really think that the Pilgrimage Monument project is as important in every sense as all the work we did on Queen Emma Summer Palace. And the reason is that it was small. It's very public, but it's not a big, huge project. And I wanted everybody to get the message that preservation is not only big ideas. Sometimes it's small ideas. And I'm hoping that everybody takes that away from the presentation. So anyway,
Wow.
happy to do it.
Thank you for that, Glenn. I think that speaks to what's in the hearts of many of us who are preservationists. So thank you so much for pointing that out, that places matter to communities and to individuals and to,
Exactly.
yeah,
Doesn't have to be a big thing.
that's right.
Okay. Andrea.
Bill, did you want to say anything else before I say goodbye to everyone with my little?
No, I think
again, thanks to Glenn. Come in
right.
next week for the next.
Yeah.
You want to remind everybody who's speaking next?
I will.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will do that. Glenn,
Thanks.
fabulous. Thank you so much.
No.
You're a treasure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I see everyone logging off. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope that this was brought some new information to you. What were you going to say, Bill?
Oh, you froze for a while at my screen, but I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
But
Oh, okay. Hope not. I want to thank our staff, Michelle Kisek, who's been providing technical support. And again, reiterate that, yes, the series goes on next week. Katie Stevens will present and explore conserving architecture for two historic churches on Maui, Wananalua Church in Hana and Ka'ahumanu Church in Wailuku. So we hope that you'll join us for that. Please sign up for the HHF newsletter, e-newsletter, if you haven't yet done so, and consider supporting our work. And please take the survey when you log off. And I think that's it. And so appreciate our community and all of you. And Bill, thank you for co-partnering,
my
and for
pleasure. Thank you
hosting.
both, you and Michelle.
Thanks.
Hui
Until
hou.
next week. A hui ho.